What's going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, Leo King here. I'm here in the High Vibe Lounge, and I'm with Maya, who you can hear on the mic. What's going on, Maya?
Hello. Hello.
We are here for the Pre-Lunar Eclipse in Capricorn. We thought we'd do a little 20-minute video here. She's going to ask me some astrology questions, and then, I don't know. Are you okay, Leo?
It's Pixie.
Is it Pixie?
Yeah. What is going on?
Pixie!
Is she like sneezing? Or is she about to do like a hairball?
I think she's about to do a hairball. Life in the lounge at High Vibe. If something was really wrong, she would be. Yeah, he would be freaking. These are crazy times. But anyway, yeah, thought we would go into some. Do you have any cool astrology questions that you might have for me, Maya?
All right. So I'll start off with one question that is relevant to right now.
Okay.
I know you talked a lot about in your deep astrology last night about Saturn coming into Capricorn. And so maybe can you talk a little bit about what Saturn is and maybe why it's so important and why it's such a big deal that Saturn has gone into Capricorn and what that effect is, just why specifically that planet and that sign is such a big deal, that combination.
Are people hearing an echo? I guess because we're both using. There's two mics. So maybe when you talk, exit me out, which is the second one, by pushing the top button, the little speaker. So now that's just you.
Okay.
So yeah, she can ask the question again.
The question, to repeat, was why Saturn coming back into Capricorn is such a big deal and why that planet and that sign and that combination is so big, and talking a little bit about the significance of that transit and that placement.
And then click you off, and then push it towards red.
Where?
The bottom audio. It's yellow. Push it towards red.
Where?
The one that I'm on. Push the audio button. There you go. All right. So Saturn back in Capricorn is, of course, a big deal because that's the home of Saturn. But Saturn rules this area because if we actually really look at it from more than what you're going to see or read in a book about astrology, is that you're going to realize that the opposite energy of Capricorn and Aquarius, where Saturn rules, is the opposite of Leo and Cancer, where the sun and the moon are ruled. And if you spray out the zodiac, of course Aries is the start of astrology from the standpoint of the 0 point, meaning the start of the spring. That's where the sun is at its exaltation point. That's where we start a chart, basically, the rising. And so there's that. But if you understand the fundamentals of the actual solar system and the power of the planets, of course the queen and the king are going to be Cancer and Leo because they rule the sun and the moon. And then there are two pages that are the closest to them, the closest to their energy is Virgo and Gemini. Because right before Cancer is Gemini, and right after Leo is Virgo, and that's Mercury. And so it lays the planets out perfectly from the sun. And then you get to Libra. So then you get to Venus, Libra, and then you get over to Taurus. And then you go down again. Leo, don't cry. Leo, be quiet. That's Saturn, right? Leo, be quiet. We're doing something professional right now. But the sun and the moon wouldn't say that, right? The king and the queen would be like, this is the kingdom. Of course he's going to show up. Right? To show you that Saturn goes against the castle. So anyway, then there's the Venus, right? And then you get to Mars, Aries and Scorpio. Then you get to Jupiter, Sag and Pisces. Then you get to Saturn. And so the two energies that go against the sun and the moon, because they're reality based, because Saturn is the last planet we see with our eyes. Whereas the sun and the moon are not planets, but luminaries. That means they're illuminating light. And it's actually the sun that illuminates the light, right? It illuminates it, and the moon is a reflector of that light, but it's still the same light from the sun. And so that's where we get in the moon more of that subconscious, or it looks like it's the light, but it's really the reflection of ourself, or it's the subconscious, and the sun being the core of the light of our soul, or even God, if you want to go there. So if you want to go to the whole story of Saturn, right? Like Saturn, it rules the dense reality itself, the physical reality. That's why it's the ruler of the bones and it's the ruler of the teeth. And so when it comes back to its home sign, it's actually us feeling physical reality more and more and more than, I guess you could say, more of our spiritual self. And it's kind of weird because it crept in a era of the last decade with the 2012 cycle, with Saturn that was in Scorpio, which is a very underworld energies. And then when it goes through Sag, it kind of puts us in between both, because Jupiter is the ruler of Sag, and Jupiter has this, reality-based thing, but it's trying to look almost outside of reality or make reality into much more of a better thing than it is. That's why Saturn hates Jupiter, because it's like Saturn wants everything to be in order, right? Just how we use the example of my cat meowing in the middle of us talking. Saturn wants to be like, hey, we're doing something right now, be quiet, right? Where Jupiter would be like, oh, how funny is the cat? It's doing that right now. And that's the thing, is though sometimes Jupiter can be too much, right? It's like, that's too much. Like you're drinking too much at the bar and you're being really loud. You know what I mean? So that's where Saturn goes, oh my gosh. So Saturn coming back to Capricorn is a big deal, because we have Pluto here, we have Jupiter here, and Jupiter's in the house of Saturn, and that's very rare to have Jupiter and Saturn in the same sign, especially when Jupiter now just had its home sign of Sagittarius in 2019, and Saturn was in his home house, so they were both like happy. But now Saturn's like, I've got Jupiter here and I've got control of him. Can I use him? Because there's a thing about Capricorn that takes power, it takes control. It rules the physical reality, where his father, Uranus, ruled the universe. Or in other ways, it was the god of the skies. But it was actually the god of the universe. And then he betrays his father and has to convince other deities to basically ban his father. So he's a betrayer for control. And this is a big deal right now, because this lunar eclipse is going to be here where the moon doesn't like to be. Jupiter doesn't like to be. So those are benefic energies. And then you have Pluto there, which you don't know what he's doing underneath there, with power and control. And then you have Saturn in his home, who has all the plans, he's the authority, he's the CEO, right? He's the captain of the ship. He's the president of the reality. And he's dictating all these planets that don't have as much power as him, and actually giving him more power. So that's why we're seeing power grabs right now, bigger than ever. There's a lot that people are going to realize, that when it comes to patience, because Saturn's slow. That's the opposite of the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon are the only two in astrology that do not change their speed. The sun does change its speed a little bit. It's very micro from the spring and summer than the fall and the winter, if you actually run the arc of the sun. That's why when you run solar arcs on people, or especially if you run progressions on people, some of the spring and summer babies, there's the progression of their sun might be a little bit behind, as far as like a winter might be a little bit quicker, but it always matches back up at the end of the day. And so with Saturn being back in Capricorn, or even when it's in Aquarius, but Aquarius is a different story, and we can talk about that in another one, but Capricorn is the heavy lead weight that goes against the lighter and light energies, and that's what gives Satan Saturn, right? It's where do we go evil? Greed or power or control that we think we have, when really that's God that has that. So it's where people or reality itself tries to, in a way, say, no, we have the power and the control. And they both have destiny aspects, but I would say that the destiny aspect of Capricorn is, did you understand divine timing from allowing the sun and moon still to rule, or are you still thinking you're the ruler of the roost? Because if you look at all the stories of Saturn or Kronos, they all don't go well. Even though he gets his power, even though he gets his control, he has a son named Jupiter, I'm so out of it right now. I just was in a nap for a second. Zeus, who is Jupiter, who then fixes everything and goes, no, this isn't right. And that's why Saturn doesn't like Jupiter. It's because his own son, remember that Kronos eats his own children. But it's Zeus is the one that becomes the god of the gods eventually, because of the fact that he does overtake his father, who is a betrayer to his father Uranus, and restores balance in the universe, basically. It's kind of like a weird story from some sort of hero movie, I guess you could say, or something, right? So, or all the Marvel movies and stuff, or Avengers or all that, they kind of steal a lot of this stuff from Roman mythology, or even the mythology of German mythology with Thor and stuff like that. So it's a big deal, because now with this lunar eclipse and with all these planets here, especially Saturn in its home, the moon's not happy, Jupiter's not happy, so there's a lot that's learning to accept that there are people out there putting an agenda out there for control. And we all have to be patient, and we all have to know how to be kind of like other deities that watched Saturn, if we took the mythology story, as he betrayed his father. So he's a betrayer. So there's betrayal right now happening to the human race. And that's where, it's hard, because in astrology, you can't try and get political about this, right? But that's where anything right now where somebody's trying to control you, you have to ask yourself, is that really true? Because Pluto's there. And Pluto is adding almost kind of like, I'm sure you've watched Aladdin, right, Maya? When the genie and the lamp go to Jafar, now the genie has to work for Jafar, right? And he turns evil and he turns bad. Think of Jupiter and Pluto as the lamp and the genie, because the lamp would be Pluto, this tiny little thing with enormous powers, but Jupiter is the genie. And then now add the moon in there, which would be like Jasmine, who's out there like a street rat in the streets, right? Because she's not in Cancer, she's not in her home, she's in her opposite house. And Jafar is with the lamp, the genie, and has Jasmine at this moment. And the only way that Aladdin even beats this whole thing out is he's smart enough to trick him into thinking that he is so powerful and he should turn himself and use his wish to become a genie, which actually traps him in a bottle. And so we all have to kind of be at this moment right now, and even though it looks like it's going to just be the end of times and the end of the world, realize that the people, when they go for their power grab and they go for their control, that there's going to be a moment where they slip, because when they get the control, that's when people fail.
Very interesting.
Oh, turn me off.
Yeah. So, when you look at these charts for all these things that happen, is there anything that the degrees of where these planets at can tell you, or do you think, I've heard there's certain degrees, like the death degree or the fatal degree, or specific things about specific degrees that show something about more specific effects of the transits, do you think that do you look at degrees when you do like your horoscopes, or is that something that you don't really focus on?
Yeah, I think degrees are very important. You can break down every degree, but I would say that the critical degrees are 0 degrees and 29, where Saturn's at right now. So if we actually take an example of any critical degree, especially with planets that deal with longer time spans. So Saturn's in a sign technically about 3 years. And so even though it did 2.5 years, now it's coming to complete its 3-year cycle, almost 3-year cycle. And at the critical degree, at the 29th, always major events happen. So a good example was March 22nd was when Saturn went into Aquarius at 0 degree. The week prior to that was March 17th, which was a lot of the lockdowns in the United States. And then March 22nd came and we were in them, but it was an Aquarius thing where, you know, at 0, it's kind of like, well, this is a weird space to be, right? Like, what? This is a weird world. And because 0 is a space between spaces, it's like a lobby to the zodiac sign. Whereas 29 degree is complete, like, exit. You've learned all your things, you've seen it all, and you're walking out of the whole party of that zodiac sign, and you're kind of walking into the 0 zone where you leave the party, and now you're kind of like in your car, and now you're back on some street you don't know, and you're like, okay, and then you finally kind of engage. So with Saturn now retrograding at 29, remember, these are what we call shadow zones in the zodiac because we're in a retrograde, which means but Saturn's already been here, so it's going to replay and try and understand this whole lockdown energy of 29 degree Capricorn around the world. It was at 29 degrees Capricorn that Saturn did the lockdowns. And and this is what's funny is one of my favorite astrologers, Michael Luton, posted a picture 2 days ago when Saturn came back. And he has a guy fishing on the back of a boat, and he talks about it's just like Saturn. Think of Saturn and Capricorn like this, or actually I'll read you all what he wrote. It's very short, and it's actually one of the best descriptions I've ever heard about planning, or how Saturn can have his weird kind of ways of doing things. It says, let out the line, reel them in. Let out the line, reel them in. Let them believe they got away. That's what you do with fishing, right? You almost like, when you hook a fish, you like don't just yank on it right away, or you're going to break the hook off, or you want them to feel like they almost got the bait. And so you kind of, let it out and then pull it in, and then let it out and then pull it in. And he goes, till they get tired. Let out the line, reel them in. If you need astrology to figure this one out, just rationalize the return of Saturn to Capricorn. All planned. And what's weird about the picture is of a man, and there's a dolphin that's actually with it. Now, when it means planned, that this picture's even planned. Nobody fishes for dolphins. That this guy planned the picture. Okay? But think about the planning that we've seen right now in the world of how ironic is it? One, just if we take from an astrological standpoint, that the talk and the execution of lockdowns was Saturn at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And now we're at the retrograde of Saturn at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And all the same talks, all the same fears, all the same worries, just so happen to pop up at the exact same time. Just so happen to be also, because I'm looking as a hermetic, I'm looking at facts and data. Now it's more extreme in areas that didn't have it as extreme in other places, right? Then there's also this planning thing. We have to start to think that with Pluto here, we're not going to go forward into Aquarius during this period. We're going to go backwards until we get into September, October, when the station happens and it comes direct in October. So some weird thing is going on here where there's planning. And whether you want to believe that or not, the whole make 'em tired. Because everybody thought that the world was going somewhat back to normal in Aquarius. But that's the whole creepy plans of Saturn against the sun and the moon, right? I have control and let me... And Michael Luton's description of get him tired, right? For control. And so this is where the 29th degree is a critical degree because it's the highest planning ever. It's the highest of any sign, whatever the 28th degree is. And so when you have Saturn in its home sign at the last degree, oh, you know those are the craziest top plans that have been planned and been pre-planned since it's a retrograde, that when Saturn was here in March, leaving into Aquarius, that the plans then are the plans that are being unfoiled now. That makes sense?
Well, yes. I think it's really interesting thinking about the degrees because that's not, I mean, coming from someone who has a basic understanding of astrology but not an extended understanding, it's really interesting how much those specific things in a chart can tell you specific degrees and specific, I don't even know what they're called. What do you even call like oppositions or squares? What is that? Like positions?
Yeah, I mean, or just if you're just calling them like aspects.
Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at those aspects, does that also tie into degrees too? Like whether it's something is a square and opposite, like I'm assuming an opposition is like 180 degrees and the square is 90. So is that sort of the same thing as degrees in going from 1 to 30 or whatever it is? Is that do you look at the squares and oppositions in terms of degrees, or do you think of it in a more of a broader sense? Or is it as specific as degrees when you're looking at those aspects, or are degrees and aspects like two separate?
So that's a good question. It's all based upon the uniqueness of whatever it is. So if there's squares or oppositions at critical degrees 29, it's going to be really intense. So let's use an example of like we just had Saturn at 0 Aquarius retrograde, and then we just had Mars enter Aries, and so there was a sextile there at 0. But a sextile at 0 is a little funky because it's in between spaces. It's the lobbies. So they're good aspects, but we're not going to see even though they're both at their home signs. It was almost kind of like if Saturn's going to retrograde back to the 29th degree, you got to like kind of put all the pieces like as a chessboard together and be like, that means somebody's going to execute the plan with full force, and has all the things figured out. And then when it comes back into 29 Capricorn, it's still in somewhat of a sextile, but it's like to fully execute a plan with full force. And aspects on their own, of course we look at degrees, but there's something about ingresses, which is the term astrologically of a planet when it ingresses into a sign, is leaving the 29th and going to the 0 degree. And so this is where we get into cusps. And those are a weird space. So a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm born, so example, I'm a cusp, I'm July 23rd, so I'm 0 Leo. But some people will be like, well, I'm July 25th, I'm a cusp too. But like this wall that goes to the street, because this wall goes to the street, you're either in the room or you're out of the room. Like, there's no like, well, I'm on the cusp, so I'm in that room too. No, once you're in the room, you're in the room. It's only the 0 degree and the 29th degree of where the 29th degree is on the other side of this wall and the 0 degree is on this wall, but the butts are on the wall, like, you know, and you can hear, like, if I put my ear to this wall right now, even though this is concrete on the other side of this drywall, if it was a normal wall, I'd be able to hear people talking in that room. The farther that you come into the room with the degrees, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, by the time you're at 2 degrees, like, you can barely even hear, right? Because then you have 2 other degrees in front of you. And imagine putting people there, or putting vibration or channels. So think about degrees like frequency bands on your radio. Just by going from 98.7 to 98.9, it could be complete static to complete FM HD transmission. So every degree is critical and important as far as that, but a critical degree is the exit and the entrance in that 2 zones, those 2 degrees, 29 and 0. The other degrees, you have to go into ancient astrology, or especially medieval astrology, to find the exaltation points. So like Mars's exaltation, or Mars's exaltation point, or its strongest point of being in Aries, is 19 degrees. And Taurus, I think, is 3 degrees for the moon. You can start going into that's where you start getting into some really funky stuff, if you want to get into degrees. Aspects, though, if you start seeing that funny things like the cusps, yeah, that's going to be weird. And it's going to be not typical. You're not going to feel it the same way. If it's within 1 to 28, you're in the ballpark, if that makes sense. You're in the room. If we're using a room analogy. But when you're at the wall, at the doorway between doorways, that's when it gets really weird. That makes sense?
That makes sense.
Do you have anything else?
Not for today. Unless you would like another question. Or if anyone has questions in the chat.
I don't know, we have 1,000 people in here, so. Yeah, but if you have a last question.
Okay, I know some people last time we did this, I was reading some of the comments, and some people were asking about intercepted houses. So this is kind of totally changing the subject, but what are intercepted houses? How can you see them in your own chart? And what does that mean, and how does that affect an interpretation as an astrologer when you see that in someone's chart?
Sorry, I had to get my drink here from in and out. Now, there's many house systems in astrology. Chris Brennan did a really good job last year, I think it was, of doing a couple videos on the Astrology podcast about, especially, he's done an amazing job with Hellenistic astrology, but he did an amazing job on looking up the ancient charts. Of course, they were using whole sign or equal sign back in the day, which equal sign, of course, is just taking the 360 degrees and putting it into the pies of 30 degrees for each 12 zodiac signs. Whole sign, of course, is just what was the horizon when you were born and what zodiac sign was there, and just putting that as the whole sign. Like, that's just you're a Leo rising, or you're a Cancer rising, or you're a Gemini rising, or you're a Capricorn rising, and like you just started all there as 0. But when you get into Ptolemy, or, you know, there was starting to be people that were doing great work with understanding the rotations of the planets and the retrogrades, and they were also starting to get very scientific. So I bring up Ptolemy. But then you get Placidus, you get Koch, you get Porphyry. Porphyry was an amazing astrologer. And there's different ways to calculate these house systems. Now, when you do Placidus, which is actually, if you go to astro.com, they're going to put Placidus first, because the Swiss are the clock guys. Like, they are very good with time. That's why Swiss watches are such a big deal. Well, if you ever want to know your exact degrees of your astrology, and I'm just being honest, because I noticed in chart programs, especially when people send me chart programs, like, where they'll send me like cafe astrology or something like that, like their degrees will be a little bit off, and I'll be like, hold on a second, I have to like adjust some things for them, because I'll be honest, there's a lot of websites out there and stuff that they probably don't. When you're calculating infinite backwards and infinite forwards of time with planets, you better be sharp as a tack with your time. And Astro.com is probably the most reliable as far as the degree, especially their ephemeris and even their charts. But when you do Placidus, this also happens in Porphyry and can change, and it can happen in Koch, I've seen too. But mainly in Placidus and Porphyry, if you run your chart and you happen to have where there is no house, meaning the actual line of the house, in a zodiac and 2 different signs, and it's going to be the opposites. So, like, let's say if it's Aries and Libra, or it's Pisces and Virgo, but then you might have, let's say you're Cancer rising, so you have a Cancer rising and a Cancer 12th house, and then you have a Capricorn 7th house, and then you have like a Capricorn 6th house, but you have no Pisces and Virgo in your chart as far as the house touching it. That means there's no rulerships to go to. It means that wherever you have an intercepted house system, you have to realize that your energies of the zodiac opposition, or the zodiac 2 signs that are in unison, that are missing, is the understanding of that soul's issue this life. That is a must do. You must deal with it this life, and it's always going to be the issue in your chart about your life. So if somebody has Aries and Libra in interception, their identity and relationships is the cause to all the problems in their chart. And if you especially look at the house that they sit in, you'll notice some really weird things. If somebody has an intercepted house and they have their sun nodes, or the moon, or the ruler of their chart in those zodiac signs that are intercepted, that soul's got a lot of work to do in that area. And you'll just notice that the themes have to do with the 2 signs that are intercepted. If it's Virgo and Pisces, reality and not reality, or even anything from mental illness to the mind or the body or health, and these are going to be the issues. If it's Leo and Aquarius, which are very rare actually, because they are ones that mean that the sun's not going to have a ruler. You got to remember that, like, placements like the Cancer and Capricorn, or again, this is what brings us to the beginning of this video, why Saturn and Capricorn and Aquarius, and the sun and Leo and the moon and Cancer, the rulers of those are so important in intercepted houses, is because we use houses in astrology to understand the rulership of the planet and the house. So if your 12th house is Cancer, that means the moon rules your 12th house. And you go look at where the moon is in your chart, what sign it's at, what house it's in. So anytime it gets hit, there's going to be a 12th house element to those energies. But when you have interceptions, there's going to be missing parts. There's going to be planets that are homeless. And that might sound crazy, but they don't have a home to go to. They don't have a direct rulership. They were not name tagged. They don't have a vibration that can be connected to them really well. They could be missing energies, and you have to learn to fill them up. Or people go lopsided. Like, they'll only play that one part of that intercepted house. So they'll play that one zodiac sign. If it's, let's say, Libra and the Aries, they'll maybe only do relationships and they never find themselves. Or if it's Aries, Libra, and they're doing the Aries thing, they only do themselves. They don't know how to be in relationships. They don't even know how to get through them. But see, there's still the irony that that's kind of similar both ways. That's a very long conversation of how to understand the difference of each house system, how to use equal and whole sign. I don't understand why people run whole sign charts, because you can do that in your head. If you know you're Leo rising, or you know you're any rising, just count in your head like where the planets would be. If let's say we'll use it simple. Aries rising, if Mars is in Scorpio, that's in your 8th house. Because the 8th house to Aries is Scorpio, right? The 8th sign. So whole sign to me is something not even worth running in at all, because if you can't do it in your head, then you probably are already too far in with astrology. That you haven't learned enough yet. But equal sign, we want to know the degree. And I'm a big believer in wanting to know the degree. Because think of it this way. I'll use the example of the lunar eclipse that's going to happen for this weekend. In America, in the West Coast, it's going to happen at 9:44 p.m. That means right after sunset, the full moon lunar eclipse is going to be rising where the sun would rise in the morning. So it's going to look big and red, and it's going to be over the horizon on the eastern. We know that only because the exact degrees, and we know where exactly where it's at. When you mix a whole sign chart, it gets rid of that. So if you're a sun in the 1st house, like me, I'm a Leo rising, it would put my sun on the rising. And that's true in essence. But I was born at 8:05 a.m., so that means I was born with the sun rising. That puts my sun in the 12th house. And I'm definitely a 12th house sun, not a sun, 1st houser, if that makes sense. So that's a long conversation to have. But I think that equal sign overall for people would be the best system to use to begin with, to understand things. And then when you get more advanced, move to Porphyry, move to Placidus, move to Coke, and start to understand the differences with Placidus and the understanding of how with Porphyry, and how how he was able to determine how to place the house systems based upon the different, looking at the first 3 house systems and then to the next 3 house systems and how he positioned them. There's a lot there, but the intercepted houses, if you have to have missing houses and zodiac signs with no house attached to them, focus on those 2 zodiac placements and start to realize that you have to learn to master this life, and you will. The negative is not bad, because the positive is that you came here to fix this life, and you will. But it's when you become aware of it, and then you start to apply that in your life. So I think it was a good talk.
Good talk.
Other than that, yeah, I'll take it from here. So thanks for being with us. Craig and I are about to go do full disclosure right now on highvibe.tv, where you can ask us really deep questions like this. And what, Leo? What? I thought I'll pull a card for you all, because I got this cool card deck. I showed it on Deep Love Tarot, and I made this my personal deck. I don't ever make personal decks, but this is like so cool. It's gonna be my personal deck. And we'll say, what do we all need to know right now at this moment with the world and what's coming up with this eclipse? The Magician card reversed. If you're going to step into energy that you know is not within your magic of your true self and connected to the universe, and you're going to try and throw that to the wind, be careful. So I'm going to go help Maya right now. Thank you all. We're going to be on High Vibe right here in the next 15 minutes doing the show that Craig and I do, where we answer all your chat and questions and emails on highvibe.tv exclusive. So if you're a member, we'll see you there. It's super cheap, and there's a 7-day free trial. So if you want to try it out, go try it out right now. we get really intense on that show, and we do it in the big studio. And Maya and I just did this for just fun. We're actually This isn't the studio. This is actually an old studio. The new studio is almost done. So I'm gonna go help her just close this down, and we'll see you guys later. Love you all. Oh, and go watch my Instagram. I just put up some crazy lives. So go to my Instagram if you want. You want to trip out. Love you.